4 artificial islands were supposed to become a green metropolis beside Singapore. The developer called it Forest City and attached a $100 billion vision to it. Later plans promised homes for about 700,000 people. Earlier marketing spoke of nearly 1 million. Instead, the world saw towers, landscaped roads, and a population nowhere near the promise. A 2023 BBC report estimated that only 15% of the planned development had been built, and just over 1% was occupied. That was a dated snapshot, and Forest City is not literally empty, but it exposes the central failure. The buildings arrived before the economy meant to fill them. Now, Malaysia is trying to turn the stalled residential dream into a financial and economic zone. Forest City sits in Johor, southern Malaysia, only a short distance from Singapore. The project was developed by Country Garden, one of China's largest property companies, together with Esplanade Danga 88, a Malaysian partner connected to Johor's state institutions. The location was supposed to make the project almost impossible to fail. Singapore had international companies, high salaries, advanced logistics, and very limited land. Johor had space, lower construction costs, and a government looking for new investment. Forest City was marketed as the bridge between those two worlds. The plan involved 4 artificial islands covering nearly 14 square kilometers. That is about 3 times the size of Singapore's Sentosa Island. The city would contain apartment towers, offices, schools, hotels, restaurants, shopping areas, a golf course, a water park, and landscaped public spaces. The marketing language was deliberately futuristic. Forest City would be smart, green, clean, and technologically advanced. It would offer residents a carefully designed alternative to crowded Asian cities. The population target changed over time. Earlier promotional material spoke of nearly 1 million people. Later plans used a target of around 700,000 residents by 2035. Either way, the scale was extraordinary. This was not a normal housing development. It was an attempt to manufacture an entire city beside one of the world's most successful financial centers. But before the city could be occupied, someone had to build the land itself. Forest City was created through coastal reclamation. New islands required seawalls, sand, drainage systems, roads, bridges, utilities, and foundations strong enough to support thousands of buildings. The engineering created powerful images. Aerial views showed shorelines appearing from shallow water. High-rise blocks emerged beside landscaped roads. A new urban landscape seemed to materialize almost overnight. But the engineering solved only the physical problem. It did not answer the economic question. Who would live there every day? Forest City's original business model depended heavily on international property buyers. The main target was not necessarily a local family looking for a first home. It was an overseas investor looking for a second residence, a holiday apartment, or a place to store capital. The logic was straightforward. Sell the apartments first. Use the revenue to build more phases. As more buildings appeared, prices would rise. Eventually, investors would become residents and the new city would come alive. That model works only while demand remains strong and financing stays available. Forest City depended on a narrow pool of overseas buyers, especially wealthy Chinese investors. That dependence created a serious weakness. When buyers purchase homes for investment rather than daily life, the city can look successful on paper while remaining quiet on the ground. Apartments may be sold, but schools, shops, offices, and public services still need actual residents. The first warning arrived in 2017 when China tightened controls on money leaving the country. That made it more difficult for Chinese buyers to purchase overseas property. Malaysian politics created another problem. Former Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad criticized the project's reliance on foreign ownership and warned that buyers should not assume they would automatically receive residency rights. At one point, he even threatened to restrict foreign purchases in Forest City. For a property investor, uncertainty is often more dangerous than a high price. If visa rules, ownership rules, and resale opportunities are unclear, the apartment stops looking like a safe, long-term asset. Environmental concerns added further friction. The islands were being built in the Johor Strait, near Singapore, and close to sensitive coastal ecosystems. Singapore raised concerns about potential cross-border effects from the reclamation. Critics questioned how the work could affect water movement, marine habitats, fishing areas, and sediment patterns. The developer said it followed Malaysian requirements and later agreed to additional mitigation measures. But the controversy damaged the project's image. Forest City was no longer only a futuristic property development. It had become part of a wider political argument about foreign capital, Chinese investment, environmental responsibility, and Malaysia's relationship with Singapore. Then, two major shocks arrived almost at the same time. The COVID-19 pandemic closed borders and stopped international travel. Potential buyers could not easily visit Malaysia. Construction slowed. Sales offices lost their main advantage. Investors who had imagined a future lifestyle suddenly faced travel restrictions and economic uncertainty. At the same time, China's property sector entered a much deeper crisis. Country Garden had expanded through enormous developments inside China and overseas. When property sales collapsed and financing became harder to obtain, the company's entire model came under pressure. CNA reported that by the end of 2023, Country Garden had total liabilities of around $164 billion, including approximately $16.4 billion in offshore debt. The financial problems of the developer affected confidence in every project connected to it. If buyers stopped arriving, sales slowed. If sales slowed, construction became harder to finance. If construction slowed, buyers became even more cautious. Forest City became trapped inside that cycle. The project's ghost city reputation grew because the visual contrast was so extreme. The buildings looked expensive and modern, but the streets did not look designed for hundreds of thousands of people. There were wide roads, large open spaces, empty retail units, and long stretches where the number of buildings greatly exceeded the number of residents. BBC, reporting in 2023, estimated that only about 15% of the planned development had been built, and just over 1% was occupied. That was a dated estimate, not a permanent statistic. CNA's report, updated in November 2025, described a resident population of around 20,000, compared with approximately 9,000 people in 2023. That means the community had grown, but it was still dramatically below the original target. The same CNA report stated that only one of the 4 planned islands had been reclaimed at that time. So, Forest City is not literally empty. Families live there, workers maintain the buildings, hotels operate, supermarkets, restaurants, property agencies, and service businesses have appeared. CNA profiled one couple who moved into Forest City because a 3-room apartment cost less than 2,000 Malaysian ringgit per month and cut their commuting time. For them, the project was not a ghost town. It was an affordable home. That human reality matters. The label is useful because it describes the gap between the promise and the population. But it becomes misleading when it suggests that no one lives there. The deeper problem is not zero occupancy. It is insufficient occupancy to support the scale of the city that was promised. And low occupancy creates a feedback loop. Fewer residents mean fewer customers. Fewer customers mean fewer shops and services. Fewer services make the area less attractive to new residents. Less demand makes investors more nervous. That makes it harder to finance the next phase. A city can survive unfinished buildings. It cannot easily survive a missing economy. Forest City is close to Singapore, but proximity is not the same as integration. Residents still need reliable transport, practical access to jobs, schools, healthcare, and confidence that the area will continue developing. The original plan assumed that apartments could come first, and the community would follow. In reality, people usually move because an economic ecosystem already exists. They need a reason to wake up there every morning, not only a reason to own property there. Malaysia is now trying to change the project's purpose. The government has given Forest City special financial zone and duty-free status. The area was also incorporated into the Johor Singapore Special Economic Zone, signed in January 2025. The new strategy is to attract more than apartment buyers. Officials want banks, logistics companies, technology businesses, financial services firms, tourism operators, and international family offices. Forest City's Family Office Scheme offers a 0% concessionary tax rate for eligible structures, initially for 10 years, with a possible additional 10 years, subject to conditions. This is not a general tax break for every resident or company. The scheme requires a physical office in Forest City, minimum assets under management, local investment, and local staff. The idea is to transform Forest City from a residential product into a place where financial activity actually happens. By October 2025, Malaysia's Securities Commission said it had received more than 30 expressions of interest and had conditionally approved 6 families under the scheme. Those are encouraging signals, but they are not the same as 6 new neighborhoods, thousands of workers, or a completed city. The rescue plan will succeed only if the financial zone creates real employment and wider economic activity. That means offices must open, workers must arrive, transport must improve, businesses must survive, and the developer must still have the money and credibility to complete the unfinished phases. The buildings themselves are not fake. The towers are real. The roads are real. The reclaimed land is real. The engineering achievement is real. What failed was the assumption that demand would automatically catch up with construction. Forest City was scaled for a future economy that had not yet been created. It relied on international buyers, rising property values, easy financing, and a developer capable of completing every phase. When those assumptions disappeared, the weakness of the model became visible. Forest City is therefore more complicated than the phrase ghost city suggests. It is a partially completed urban experiment, underoccupied compared with its original promise, and now being forced to reinvent itself. The financial zone strategy could give it a second life. If the Johor Singapore Economic Zone creates real jobs, Forest City could become a practical residential base for workers and families. If the financial strategy succeeds, the project could evolve from a speculative housing development into a commercial center. But if the new incentives attract investors without creating a broad local economy, Forest City may remain a beautiful collection of towers, waiting for a city to arrive. The real test will not be another promotional video. It will be visible in 3 places. First, the number of people living there. Second, the number of permanent jobs created there. And third, whether new businesses can survive without depending entirely on property sales. Megaprojects do not become cities when the cranes disappear. They become cities when people fill the schools, use the shops, commute to work, build businesses, and decide to stay. Forest City was designed as a vision of tomorrow. The problem is that tomorrow never arrived on schedule. Now, Malaysia is trying to build the economy that should have existed before the apartments. Would you live in Forest City if the jobs and transport finally arrived? Or is the project too large, too isolated, and too dependent on investment money to become a normal city? The towers are already there. The question is whether a real community can still grow around them.